What if one man's death could shake the foundations of an entire civilization? What if the price of truth was not just exile, but a poisoned cup? This is the story of Socrates, a man who never wrote a book, never called himself a philosopher, yet whose final moments rewrote history itself. From the bustling streets of Athens to a grim prison cell, his journey is a relentless tide of decisions and consequences, each more fateful than the last. Friends, be sure to subscribe to my Quiet History channel, like it, and leave a comment of at least 7 words. This is necessary for the channel to function. Share this video with others if you think it's important. Thank you. Born in the 5th century before our era, in the Alapis district just outside Athens, Socrates was a son of modest means. His father, Socrates, was either a stonemason or a sculptor, a craftsman shaping stone with precision and patience. His mother, Phanerete, was a midwife, a role demanding calm and skill, guiding new life into the world. Socrates later compared his mission of philosophy to her craft, helping souls give birth to truth, just as she helped mothers bring forth children. But what does it mean when a simple craftsman's son becomes the conscience of a city? Athens in those days was not yet the undisputed power of Greece. It was a city arising from the ashes of war, recovering from the Persian invasions that had burned the Acropolis to the ground. The air was thick with ambition. Democracy was finding its feet amid the rubble, and the seeds of art and philosophy were already sprouting. The boy Socrates grew up watching this rebirth, the relentless building of temples and statues, the hammering of craftsmen who shaped the future with every strike. What future could a young mind forge amid such transformation? His childhood was steeped in the classical ideals of Athens, education infused with music, literacy, athletics, and ethics. Like every Athenian boy, he trained in the palestra, where body and mind were honed together, embodying the principle of kalokagathia, the unity of physical beauty and moral virtue. Yet, despite these ideals, Socrates would become their paradox, challenging everything his youth was built upon. What internal battle raged behind that sturdy frame and unassuming face? Physically, Socrates was robust and tall, though later accounts described him with unflattering features, a flattened nose, thick lips, and striking eyes. Yet in his youth, he bore no shame to these traits. His training included military service, 2 years of rigorous preparation known as the ephebia. But unlike his peers, who chased glory in the gymnasium or politics, Socrates was different. He was silent, reflective, bound by a mysterious inner voice, the daimonion, that restrained him from rash acts. What power lies in a voice no one else can hear? This inner voice shaped his path, steering him away from ambition and spectacle toward relentless questioning. It was this unwavering pursuit of truth that earned him both devoted friends and fierce enemies. In a city grappling with democracy's fragile promise, Socrates' refusal to conform became dangerous. When the time came to choose between silence and speaking out, between safety and sacrifice, he made a choice that would echo through millennia. How far can a man go to live without betraying himself? In his final hours, confined within dark prison walls, Socrates faced his judges with calm defiance. He refused exile, refused to renounce his principles. Instead, he drank the poison hemlock, uttering words that still haunt our conscience. His death was not the end, but a beginning, the birth of an idea that conscience must hold sacred even in the face of death. What legacy is forged when a man dies for truth? This is no mere biography. It is a tempest of choices, fear, and irreversible actions. A story of what it means to live authentically, to confront power, and to endure solitude. Socrates transformed from an ordinary Athenian to the eternal symbol of moral integrity, a beacon for all who dare to seek the truth. His life is a testament that sometimes the most uncomfortable voices demand to be heard. If you want to dive deeper into the twists of history shaped by human courage and fatal decisions, join Quiet History. Subscribe now and come back every day for stories that challenge what you think you know. The past is never just behind us. It lives on in the echoes of every choice we make. What does it mean to truly know something? Can relentless questioning destroy the comfort of accepted truths? Or does it forge a sharper understanding? Socrates, unlike many of his contemporaries, refused to accept explanations without demanding clarity. His teachers called him stubborn, but his persistence was the spark that ignited an intellectual revolution. Yet, even as Athens transformed, his path diverged sharply from the ambitions of his peers, setting the stage for a profound confrontation with the nature of knowledge itself. Athens was changing fast. Democracy was no longer a concept, but a living, breathing force shaping everyday life. Citizens voted, served on juries, and filled the assembly halls with their voices. Public schools emerged, teaching the art of rhetoric, where many young Athenians dreamed of political power or fame as orators. But Socrates rejected this race for influence. He saw rhetoric as empty decoration, a mask hiding deeper questions about justice and truth. His early doubts would become the foundation of a philosophy that challenged the very soul of Athens. This was no mere academic exercise. It was a challenge to the social order itself. Born into a modest family with no noble connections, Socrates' world was humble, defined by the clang of the stonemason's hammer and the rhythm of the city's poets. But beneath this simplicity stirred a restless mind, hungry not for glory, but for meaning. Around him, wandering sophists charged for wisdom, and citizens wrestled with questions about the soul and the state. These ideas, initially alien to the young man, began to seep into his consciousness, shaping a resolve that would shake Athens to its core. But to what end? When Socrates reached adulthood, he underwent the obligatory military training known as the ephebia. In the 5th century BCE, serving in the military was not just duty, it was a crucible of loyalty and endurance, weaving the individual's fate with that of the polis. Socrates was no exception. He fought as a hoplite, fully armed with spear, shield, and armor, in 3 major campaigns, at Potidaea, Delium, and the Boeotian expedition. Each battle tested more than just his body. It tested his spirit, his discipline, and his ability to remain calm amid chaos. At Potidaea, Socrates' endurance was legendary. Plato recalls how, in the biting cold, he stood motionless for hours, lost in thought, while others sought warmth. Alcibiades, once a starry-eyed admirer, remembered how Socrates went barefoot through frost and wore no extra clothing, seemingly immune to the elements. His mind was relentless, turning over questions deep into the night, seeking answers as dawn approached. This was no ordinary soldier. This was a man whose battlefield was as much internal as external. But how far could such resolve carry him when the city itself was on the brink of turmoil? In the brutal clash at Delium, where Athens faced a devastating defeat against the Boeotians, Socrates again displayed unshakable composure. Xenophon, though too young to fight there, later credited Socrates with saving him from danger, an account more symbolic than literal, capturing the essence of Socrates' presence amid chaos. His calm steadied those around him, a beacon in the storm of war. Yet this composure concealed a deeper struggle, a man wrestling with the meaning of courage, duty, and survival when the polis itself felt fragile and uncertain. But it was not on the battlefield where Socrates made his most irreversible choice. It was in the quiet, relentless pursuit of truth, where he confronted the terrifying recognition of his own ignorance. The famous declaration, "I know that I know nothing," was no mere phrase. It was a radical admission that shattered the illusion of certainty. This was the moment when Socrates stepped away from the crowd, choosing a path of questioning over comfort. Here began a journey that would unsettle Athens and redefine what it meant to seek knowledge. How could one man's doubt shake the foundations of an entire society? He listened with intense focus, often responding with silence that stretched long enough to unsettle his interlocutors. His method was not to impose answers, but to expose contradictions, forcing others into the abyss of self-examination. This was the birth of a new intellectual discipline, one that rejected pretense and demanded courage. Socrates was no conqueror, no lawmaker, no poet, yet his ideas would echo through history, shaping the very core of Western thought. What price would Athens pay for his refusal to conform? Every moment of Socrates' life was a crossroads, a chain of fateful decisions that defied the allure of power and prestige. From the noisy assembly halls of democracy to the brutal battlefields, from the humble forge to the bustling schools of rhetoric, he chose the path of relentless inquiry. His story is a testament to the power and danger of asking the questions that no one else dared to ask. As his shadows lengthened over Athens, the question hung heavy in the air. Would his pursuit of truth lead to enlightenment or to ruin? If you found yourself drawn into this tale of relentless questioning and courage, subscribe now to Quiet History, where we dive deep into the moments and minds that shaped humanity's fate. What if everything you believed to be true suddenly shattered into pieces? This is exactly what happened when Socrates began questioning those around him. One question led to another, each answer unraveling further uncertainties. What seemed obvious dissolved into a maze of contradictions, exposing fragile human reasoning. This relentless inquiry wasn't just conversation. It was a force that threatened the very foundations of belief. Socrates himself called this relentless questioning maieutic, the art of the midwife. Like his mother, who helped women give birth to life, he believed he helped people give birth to ideas. But this intellectual labor was no gentle process. It demanded patience, precision, and sometimes painful honesty. He never handed out answers or pressed his opinions. Instead, He forced his interlocutors to confront their own assumptions and reach truths on their own terms. One of Socrates' favorite weapons was irony. He would approach discussions pretending ignorance as if he knew nothing. With polite naivety, he'd ask for explanations, feigning confusion. But this facade was a trap. He'd seize on contradictions and expose logical flaws that his opponent desperately tried to hide. He never mocked outright, but his simple, unadorned speech dismantled the complacency of many, especially those arrogant enough to think they had mastered wisdom. Socrates spoke with shoemakers about craftsmanship, warriors about courage, poets about inspiration, officials about justice, always circling back to one elusive truth. What makes a person genuinely wise and virtuous? He never sought traditional success, no political office, no public acclaim, no power. Yet his name echoed through Athens, known to supporters and adversaries alike, a man both revered and feared for his unyielding challenge to accepted norms. Among his sharpest targets were the sophists, public teachers who sold their skills in rhetoric. Socrates did not despise them personally, but he condemned their method. They taught how to win arguments, how to speak beautifully, but not how to seek truth. In his eyes, rhetoric without truth was empty and dangerous. Virtue was not teachable like literacy. It required relentless inner work. This belief set him on a collision course with those invested in superficial success. The sophists sensed a threat. Socrates came without fanfare, without promises, yet one conversation with him could demolish reputations. He ignored worldly status, refused payment, and shunned the trappings of a formal teacher. Instead, he walked the streets, entering marketplaces, temples, and courts, engaging anyone willing to talk, igniting a storm of thought where certainty once reigned. Plato recounts moments like the dialogue with Euthyphro, a man convinced he understood piety. Socrates' questions stripped away Euthyphro's confidence, revealing he could not define where virtue ended and arbitrariness began. Or the conversation with Meno, where the very concept of virtue crumbled under scrutiny. In his famous Apology, Socrates boldly declared he was fulfilling a divine mission, questioning everyone to test if they truly knew what they claimed. Not all welcomed his methods. Many left conversations irritated, some thoughtful and returning, others hostile, feeling humiliated and filled with rage. His approach was dangerous. It denied safe refuge in easy answers and comforted ignorance. Instead, it demanded effort, self-examination, a painful reckoning with one's deepest beliefs. Socrates gathered no formal school, yet youth flocked to him, not for promises or doctrines, but for the rare gift of being truly heard and challenged. His silence spoke volumes. His listening was an invitation to think. He did not seek followers. He created thinkers. His mission was guided by a mysterious inner voice, a divine daimon, steering him away from error, compelling him to walk a solitary path between the crowd and the unknown. Day after day, on the bustling streets of Athens, beneath the noise of markets and the shadows of temples and courts, Socrates spoke. Not for glory, not for power, not for a school, but for one purpose: to awaken at least one person to question what they do and why. Every question, every answer, Every confrontation was a choice that shaped history, a relentless quest for truth in a world afraid to look beyond appearances. So what will you do when your beliefs crumble? Will you resist, retreat, or follow Socrates' path into the storm of questions? The choice is yours, and it echoes through time. Subscribe to Quiet History to dive deeper into the stories that shaped humanity's greatest turning points. What does it mean to truly teach? Did Socrates ever see himself as a master, a guide, or a leader of a school? He never held formal lessons or gathered disciples in the traditional sense of Athens. No doctrines were handed down, no claims to authority made. Yet, despite his refusal to lead, some were drawn back to him, compelled by the strange way thinking changed in his presence. These figures never always called themselves his students, but they lingered, voices echoing, memories surviving. They became the living threads of his legacy. But what pull was so magnetic, so dangerous, that it could twist lives forever? Among those closest to Socrates, none was more contradictory or vibrant than Alcibiades. Born of noble blood and raised by Pericles himself, Alcibiades wielded charm, looks, and a gift of speech that promised him limitless power. Their first meeting in Alcibiades' youth left an indelible mark. Alcibiades would later liken Socrates to a satyr, a creature whose words could shatter the very foundations of belief. Yet even this fearless man was vulnerable. Socrates was the only one he feared, the only one before whom he felt shame. What does it mean when the greatest conqueror of men is undone by a single voice? When the intimate is refused, when wisdom demands a price no flesh can pay? Alcibiades tried to bind Socrates to himself, but the philosopher refused, choosing the mind over the body. That rejection sent Alcibiades away, into politics, war, betrayal, and exile. The shadows of his choices would never lift. Years later, as Alcibiades' name was stained by both glory and disgrace, his thoughts returned to Socrates, something eternal, something unbroken within him that he could neither escape nor overcome. How does a man carry a ghost so deeply embedded in his soul? Meanwhile, a different relationship with Socrates would shape history. Plato, 40 years younger, met a matured and famed Socrates. Born into aristocracy, educated in poetry and science, Plato abandoned his youthful pursuits after encountering the philosopher. He devoted himself to preserving and shaping the image of Socrates, no longer just a man, but a symbol. Plato did not merely record dialogues. He crafted a philosophical form where Socrates' voice was inseparable from the relentless search for truth. Plato wrote that Socrates never declared truths. He asked questions. This choice dictated dialogue as the form, no final word, no absolute answer. In the early works, Apology, Crito, Euthyphro, Socrates remains close to the historical man, the relentless questioner. But as Plato's thoughts evolved in Republic and Phaedo, Socrates transformed, becoming a vessel of Platonic philosophy. Yet even then he remained human, calm, ironic, stubborn, internally free. This was no marble statue carved in stone, but a living figure challenging every assumption. But Plato's image was only half the story. Another witness, less dialectical but no less devoted, was Xenophon, a soldier and memoirist, participant in Cyrus the Younger's campaign. Xenophon's portrayal of Socrates was that of a practical mentor, stern, reserved, steady. Unlike Plato's Socrates, the subversive interrogator, Xenophon's was the wise counselor, a steadfast example. His accounts are simpler, sometimes naive, yet they resonate with genuine admiration. Through these two narratives, Plato's and Xenophon's, we glimpse two faces of the same man, Socrates as philosopher and Socrates as mortal. But the story does not end with words. In Socrates' final years, one figure stood quietly beside him, Crito, possibly older, a lifelong friend, unwavering in loyalty. Crito's silence was a testament, a weight carried without spectacle or speech. When tyranny demanded betrayal of conscience, when disobedience meant death, Crito risked much. Yet he was spared, by fate, by connections, or by being harmless to the regime. This silent defiance was not forgotten. When democracy returned a year later, Athens enacted an amnesty law to forbid prosecution of those involved under the 30 tyrants. The city sought to forget, to forgive, to move forward. Yet beneath the surface, tension simmered, fear, suspicion, an uneasy quiet. What price does a society pay for survival when the past is buried but unresolved? What if the very man who questioned everything around him was seen not as a thinker, but as a threat? What if asking simple questions could unravel the fragile stability of an entire city? In the spring of 399 years before our era, Athens was a city teetering on the edge, a city haunted by defeat, betrayal, and the desperate longing for order. Into this tense atmosphere stepped Socrates, around 70 years old, a man whose presence sparked unease rather than comfort. Socrates wasn't a politician, nor a loud agitator. He didn't rally crowds or make public declarations, yet his conversations never ceased. His questions dug deep, exposing the hollow core of official judgments and accepted truths. To many, he was more than a man. He was a mirror, reflecting the fears and failures of Athenian society. A citizen, he insisted, was not merely a voter, but a thinker, a person with conscience, standing apart from the herd. But Socrates' associations breathed suspicion into his image. His close ties to Alcibiades, twice a traitor to Athens, and Critias, one of the cruelest tyrants, turned him into a symbol of rot and subversion. The city began to see him not just as a philosopher, but as the source of decay, a seed of doubt threatening their fragile democracy. Though he never called for rebellion, the mood in Athens darkened, as if a revolt was only a question of time. The weight of these suspicions soon bore down on Socrates in a courtroom filled with 501 jurors, ordinary citizens called to judge the man who had unsettled their world. The charges came from a young, relatively unknown citizen named Miletus, backed by Anytus, a powerful defender of traditional values, and Lycon, protector of the city's morals and theatrical audience. Their accusations were clear and damning. Socrates was guilty of impiety, disrespecting the gods of Athens and introducing new divinities, and corrupting the youth. The stakes could not have been higher. In Athens, such charges were tantamount to threatening the very foundation of the polis, and death was a very real punishment. The city feared what Socrates represented: the erosion of faith, the undermining of authority, the invitation to question everything. Youth who listened to him began to scorn parents, mock customs, and withdraw from civic duties, gathering in secret philosophical circles that unsettled even the most steadfast defenders of the democracy. When Socrates took the stand, he spoke calmly and without theatrics. His defense, preserved by Plato in the text known as the Apology of Socrates, was neither a plea for mercy nor a calculated legal strategy. Instead, he dissected each charge with serene resolve, refusing to bow to fear or falsehood. He declared his belief in gods, not necessarily the ones enshrined in myths and statues, but a divine presence guiding his life, expressed through his inner daimonion. This was no ordinary trial. It was a clash between a city desperate to hold on to certainty and a man who embodied doubt itself. Socrates lived as he always had, walking Athens' streets, questioning, probing, refusing to conform. But now the gaze of Athens had changed. It was no longer curiosity or admiration. It was suspicion, fear, and the grim recognition that a single man's relentless questioning might unravel the very fabric of their world. What would be the price of such unyielding integrity? How far could a society go to silence the voice that disturbs? Socrates did not flinch, did not retreat. He planted a question in the heart of Athens that day, a question that would echo through the ages. When does the pursuit of truth become a threat to order? And when does silence become complicity? This story is not just about a trial. It is about the irreversible consequences of choices made in fear, about the fragile line between courage and destruction, and about the human fear that shapes history. If you want to uncover the full truth behind these moments that changed everything, subscribe to Quiet History and join us in exploring the shadows where history's darkest decisions were made. What drives a man to challenge the very soul of a city? Could Socrates hear a warning voice inside him, one that kept him from error, and yet embrace it as divine reason? He believed this inner guide was no contradiction to Athens' religion, but its truest expression, a spark of the gods themselves. But what happens when such conviction collides with mortal judgment? Socrates reminded the jurors of a haunting declaration by the Delphic oracle, who once named him the wisest of men. Yet he confessed to feeling ignorant. He knew nothing. This relentless self-questioning led him to interrogate poets, craftsmen, and politicians, exposing their shallow claims of knowledge. If he alone recognized his ignorance, was that wisdom or madness? The tension grew as he laid bare the fragile facade of Athenian knowledge. Accused of corrupting the youth, Socrates offered a calm but unsettling defense. He did not teach, charge fees, or run a school. Instead, he simply conversed, asking questions that forced listeners to think for themselves. If change came, it was their own doing, not his influence. Who then, he challenged, truly educates? His accusers fell silent, unable to name a single figure. Yet the shadow of accusation loomed ever larger, casting doubt on Athens' values. When the verdict arrived, it tore through the courtroom like thunder. 280 jurors condemned him. 220 stood alone in defense. In a city that prided itself on justice, a man who sought only truth was branded a threat. But the ordeal was far from over. The next battle was over the sentence, and each proposal would reveal the raw nerves beneath Athenian civility. The prosecutor demanded death. Socrates, ever defiant, first proposed the unthinkable: state-sponsored upkeep in a public brothel, mocking the city's champions. Anger flared among the jurors. Then he offered a modest fine, backed by his friends' pledges. But the crowd's mood had shifted irrevocably. Now, nearly 360 voted for death. The city's heart had hardened, and the noose tightened. Faced with death, Socrates did not plead for mercy. Instead, he stood tall, refusing to appeal to the crowd's sympathies or abandon his principles. He urged the court to examine his life. He had harmed none, taken nothing, craved no power, and never lied. If he was silenced, Athens would lose its gadfly, the restless force that stirs even the sleeping horse. The verdict was final, but the storm had only just begun. In his final words there was no bitterness, no rage. He spoke calmly of death, not as an end, but as either an endless dream without fear, or a journey to another realm, where he might meet Archilochus, Homer, and Odysseus, to continue the search for truth. His farewell was quiet, serene, a stark contrast to the tumult that had consumed him. Yet beneath that calm lay a profound rupture in the soul of Athens. The trial of Socrates was more than a legal proceeding. It was a turning point. Athens, which boasted freedom of thought, found itself unprepared for a man who embodied that freedom to its extreme. He gathered no followers, formed no factions, sought no office, yet his very ability to think aloud, to question the obvious, posed an existential threat. The city silenced his voice, but could it silence the ideas he sparked? Officially, the trial was lawful, the procedure flawless, and the sentence carried out without incident. Statues were not carved, and monuments not raised. But in the whispers of workshops, on the streets, and within the gymnasiums, Socrates' name began to echo, not as that of a condemned man, but as that of a profound loss. A silent reckoning was taking hold, unsettling the city's foundations. The first Plato, his most devoted student, began to write dialogues shortly after Socrates' death. But these were no biographies, no dry chronicles of events or exhaustive treatises. He preserved Socrates as he was in life, alive in the form of relentless questioning. In these works, Socrates debates politicians, poets, sophists, youths, and women. He asks, probes, and pushes ideas to their breaking point, turning every conversation into a battlefield of the mind. In the earliest dialogues, Apology, Crito, Euthyphro, Socrates appears close to the man who walked the streets of Athens. But in later works like Phaedo, Republic, and Parmenides, he becomes the vessel of Platonic philosophy itself. Yet through every iteration, Socrates remains the figure who thinks aloud and forces others to think with him, embodying the very essence of inquiry. Yet Plato was not the only one to shape Socrates' legacy. Xenophon, another student, soldier, and historian, offered a starkly different portrait. His Socrates was no metaphysical labyrinth, but a moral guide, a voice of prudence discussing virtue, education, and the public good. This image is simpler, more grounded, and undeniably human, painting Socrates less as a philosopher and more as a man wrestling with the practicalities of life. But the trial of Socrates became a cautionary tale as Athens' democracy matured, a stark reminder that even a free city can stumble. Beyond Athens, his name echoed through the schools of philosophy. Antisthenes and Diogenes, Aristippus and Scipio, and countless others who either revered or contested his ideas. Each school, from Stoics to Cynics, skeptics to Epicureans, grappled with his legacy, always with a profound respect. Time itself seemed to recognize him as the question, not the founder. Cicero called Socrates the first to bring philosophy down from the heavens to the human world, shifting focus from stars to men. The Middle Ages viewed him ambivalently, some as a pagan bearer of light, others as too proud to need divine revelation. The Renaissance hailed him as a sage living by reason, the 19th century as a hero of individual dignity, and the 20th as the very voice of inner freedom. He left no doctrines, no schools, no written words of his own. All we know comes through others, but precisely this absence made him not a teacher, but a living example, not a mentor, but a memory. He did not seek martyrdom, nor did he crave death. He simply refused to retreat. He did not crave fame. He lived his words. And when he died, it was not with a grand gesture, but in calm fidelity to himself. Thus the legend began, not a fiction, but a truth lived and relived by generations as an inner experience. Socrates became more than a name. He became a lens through which to see the world. And if philosophy truly begins with wonder, then he was the first to teach us to wonder. If his story stirs something in you, a relentless hunger to question and to remain unwavering, subscribe to Quiet History and join us as we explore the forces that shape our past and our future.